South Africa has received more balanced news coverage than any other country in Africa. This is according to a review by International Media Institute, Media Tenor. The review evaluates global television coverage between the 1st of June 2013 and the 1st of July 2014. Results are based on an analysis of nearly 12,000 reports on Africa out of a total of just over 450,000. Senior researcher at Media Tenor, Minette Nievold, is in our Pretoria studio. Minette, thank you very much for your time this morning. When you did or conducted the survey, were you surprised by this finding and where South Africa came out in it?
Hi, firstly, morning, thank you for having me. Yes, to some extent at Media Tenor, we were not suspecting that South Africa would be the winners of this award. But going through the reports, as you mentioned, over 450,000 reports, and then sifting down for the over 12,000 on Africa specifically, South Africa was a clear winner. And I'm very proud to say that because as I'm South African as well, it's nice to know that the international media agenda is looking towards South Africa and is reporting on us on quite a balanced way.
In doing your research or doing this check on media coverage, what exactly were you considering? What types of stories were you looking at and what were you looking for in those stories or in that coverage?
So, as you mentioned, we were looking for balanced news coverage. So we looked at a variety of topics. All the different countries had to be covered on a number of different issues. So, for example, if your media presence was only based on one issue, like Kenya, who was mostly viewed around their elections, that it does not signify to us a balanced media image. So you had to receive coverage on your political relations in terms of international and national relations, then also economic issues, and then a few more soft stories like how are your international athletes performing on the global stage? What about cultural or tourism events and things like that? So we looked for a balance of topics and then a balance of news reporting. In other words, if you received overly negative coverage, you know, we cannot attribute an award to a country that's known for negative stories like, for example, violence, war, terrorism, and things like that.
Now, Minette, very interesting because in this period, we saw the death of Nelson Mandela. We saw the Oscar Pistorius case also receiving coverage. We also saw our very own elections, which were sort of all very, very big stories that drew lots of international attention as well. How did we fare in covering those stories? And do you think it actually helped because there were special conditions that were laid down for coverage of these stories, especially sort of things like Oscar Pistorius and our elections, where the media has no choice but to be balanced?
Well, it's very important to note that even when you say the media has no choice to be balanced, there is always a choice. We find that a lot of media houses still have an inherent reporting bias, so it's never a given that reporting will be balanced. When you look at stories like the passing of Nelson Mandela and the Oscar Pistorius trial, as you correctly mentioned, those were the stories that garnered us a lot of media attention internationally. It really placed the spotlight on South Africa. And if we look at our general election specifically, unfortunately in Africa there is a bias of news reporting where the rest of the world suspects that elections in Africa will not go off without a hitch. In other words, they expect violence, they expect a civil uproar, and things like that. And in the case of South Africa, our elections went off without any such issues. So reporting was actually a little bit more positive than what we would expect.
I mean, I suppose everybody would be asking the obvious question, who are the worst offenders?
The worst offenders, unfortunately, were the Central African Republic, and I would like to say for obvious reasons. Unfortunately, things like civil unrest and, you know, the issues going on in Bangui earlier in the year, those issues really bring a negative tint to the way that international media and international audiences see the country.
And just to round it off for us, Minette, South Africa coming out tops in your research. In a nutshell, what is it saying about our media? Are we evolving? Are we sort of bowing to pressure on the other side, maybe not digging deep enough to get the other side of the story? Are we just being mediocre so that things stay balanced and above board?
Well, balance in this case is not a bad thing. Balance is in fact a very good thing. If media houses are able to report in a balanced way, it means that they're investigating different angles. They try to get quotes from both sides of the coin, and that to us is very important. And I think, as you know, a normal general citizen, I like to see that the news shows me both sides of the argument. And we found that the South African media we included in the analysis, remember we looked at international media in general, but the South African media included had very balanced news coverage as a whole as well. And in that sense, not to be too impressed with yourselves, but eNCA Africa was also one of the top media that we looked at. And the way that eNCA Africa was reporting on other countries in Africa was also showing a lot of depth and showing a lot of creativity in terms of investigative reporting, not just taking things at face value, but really showing both sides of the coin, both sides of the argument. So good job for everyone.
Oh, wonderful news. And you said that at the right time as we come up to bonus time. Thank you very much, Senior Researcher at Media Tenor, Minette Nievold.